interesting things to share with us all, so let's hold them to that. The panel is Confronting DAO Assumptions. There is no shortage of assumptions and I think lessons that we've all learned, so this should be a juicy conversation. And I want to start it off with maybe the juiciest one, which is the idea of the importance of tokens in DAOs. Should DAOs have tokens? Do we need tokens? When token? Parker, I know you have thoughts on this, so would love to start with you.
Yeah, thanks for kicking us off. Super happy to be here, and it's an honor to be on a panel with such amazing and impactful people working in this space. Yeah, tokens, loaded topic. I think while tokens can provide the right incentives and enhance the correct first principles of a DAO, what's actually more important is really thinking about the infrastructure that underlies that. So for example, what is your North Star? How are you thinking about attracting a network of intrinsically motivated and aligned participants in your DAO? First and foremost, and I think most importantly, is there even demand for a DAO, right? Like, does the community that you're trying to cultivate want a DAO, and does the DAO make sense as a business model for what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this moment where, Cabin launched with a crowdfund. It was sort of this opportunity for a community to come together to provide some funds to kickstart something. Whole new brands emerged from that moment. The sellout of a crowdfund was sort of a big thing, and so it seems as if like the idea of launching a token from day one was really embedded in a lot of the assumptions or a lot of the DAOs that launched over the last couple of years. I think there's a number of folks right now who I think quite rightfully say, hey, these tokens actually cause a lot more friction in the short term than maybe benefit. But John, I know you have a different opinion there. You're very much a fan of launching a token from day one.
I am. This has become a hot take. As you said, this was like standard practice in 2021. Then all of a sudden, nobody wanted to have tokens in 2022. I actually believe that having a token from day one is a really good idea, as long as you don't over-financialize it. So I think it's important to start building a community and distributing ownership of your governance or whatever your token represents to that community from the beginning, because it's a lot harder to do that retroactively down the line. But the key here is you don't just want anyone to be able to go to a liquidity pool and buy your token or sell it, right? And all of a sudden they have this very transactional relationship with your organization. So I very much agree with what Parker said about the social core of what you're doing being the most important part. But I actually believe we should be launching tokens from the beginning.
What is the best benefit, the best case for launching one immediately? Because I would see a big danger, and it's these are used for governance. A group that's day one has not figured out who their stakeholders are, has not figured out a coherent governance strategy. So I assume there's other ways to think about what a token would do off chain, and it feels like it could risk, like you said, financializing it, because I think that. Yeah, it seems like a risk of kind of building in governance assumptions that you can't figure out on day one.
I think I have a point to that, which is thinking about squad wealth, right? That thing from other internet where they're saying you need a squad first, wealth second, is really important. You have to figure out who your people are before you financialize them. Because once you financialize, there's really no turning back. Am I feedbacking? Okay, sorry.
I think it's just pointed towards the mic, so point this way. Yeah.
This way. Let's try this.
Yeah, so Austin, I remember back in the day, pre-Metalabel, Austin was working on a co-op called Ampled. And I was super interested in what they were doing, and this was not on chain, but they had a spreadsheet basically where they were tracking contributions, and from early on they had a sense of sort of this self-tracked who was contributing what. I think having those sort of records early is really important. I think having like a very specific sort of like minimum viable governance thing that you want to do as a community is also a really good way to do this. So like our original crowdfund was a donation to support a creator residency program. People got a token and they got to vote on which creators got to come out for the residencies. That was the whole point of the token. So there's like this very simple governance mechanic that worked from day one. Like you don't want to try to write your constitution on day one because like there's, to your point, you can get locked into these kind of governance traps, but you do want to have like these very simple games that your community can start playing together.
Completely agree with that. I think one call out here that's really interesting, right, is there's, in my opinion, not one right way to create a DAO. And so it's really interesting to hear with what you're saying about your belief in having a token from day one, even if it's not financialized. The approach that we've taken at Boys Club is actually really different. We've started with almost everything off-chain. And the goal of that is to really design and iterate and test processes and systems within our DAO before we create a token of any kind. So this goes from everything from onboarding to offboarding, governance mechanics and weight, proposal system and optimization for the proposal process. We want to empower the members of our DAO with the resources and context and practice that they need to have the muscle memory to understand and participate in a DAO in a meaningful way that drives ownership and participation and ultimately shapes the future of what we're trying to achieve here. To us, we took a minimum viable community MVC approach in building our DAO. So that means minimum viable community members in the DAO and minimum viable amount of tools so that we could design and test and iterate these processes before moving anything on chain. This has worked pretty well for us so far. One example is like for governance, we use emoji React in Discord. So we have a whole proposal and voting system with different voting weights, but we aren't doing this on Snapshot. We aren't doing this on another platform. We're starting just in Discord to get our members used to the process of doing that first.
I think embedded in the decision to launch a token was one of being able to capture financing for these organizations. And so there's a very clear trade-off by doing these things off-chain and maybe not allowing for that speculation to emerge really quickly and the ability to capture resources. And I think it was probably a moment in time where we were coming through. I'm not sure if that era exists. I mean, I don't think it exists today in the same way, though maybe a bunch of the PFPs that I've minted will become a DAO, and that'll be exciting. Probably not. We'll see. Maybe. I don't know. But I think embedded in beyond sort of the idea of sort of financing is this idea of ownership and distributing ownership. Like why launch as a DAO with a token from day one is that you have distributed and provided access to folks who maybe wouldn't always have access to. There's the whole trend of fair launches, et cetera. And so I think there's, embedded in that idea is this idea of like, do people really want ownership in these things, or what does that look like? And I know, Rayhan, you've spent a lot of time thinking about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, at FWB, and I'm sure for all of our communities here, we've always thought about the fact that some people do actually want to build the thing, but some people just want to enjoy it from the sidelines. They want to be a part of, the club. They want to be in the club, not necessarily building the bylines, the rules, the programming, all of that. And as people who build communities, you have to understand the full spectrum of people being, to use a citizenship example, tourists to citizens to, local council to, the upper echelons of governance. And not everyone's going to be at the top, nor do you want everyone to be at the top, because then you have issues where people may overinvest their time and energy, but like underinvest on, like, let's say the output or something, or the wider directionality of the community.
I think like a fungible token is such like a blunt instrument that like for governance and for ownership, if it's just that one thing, it's not a very elegant representation for how communities actually work. Like, yes, but like the idea that there are stakeholders that may not have the ability to be involved from day to day. And so I think that's like, I see that as a big missing piece, as like thinking about how different stakeholders are classified within groups. If it's just token holders, then I see that being not a very elegant reflection. And so, yeah, I think like that's like a first step, and I think it means that more DAOs should transition to representative governance more than this kind of like one token, one vote model.
I actually want to add to that. That's a really good point. I agree with that. I think for us, one hard lesson was you had people who were community members and held the token. You had people who were not community members and just speculators, right? So as, number go up, number go down, whatever, we had to still manage expectations, and that becomes a really big drain. Once you tokenize, you have to really understand that people are looking at you from the outside and may not want to come inside even. They're just like, they're like this. So, number up, and you're like, yo, you're not inside. We can't help you, right?
So just because there's a token doesn't mean it has to be financialized. And I think we've gotten ourselves in this trap where we think that this industry is about cryptocurrencies. It's not. It's about tokens that can be used for all kinds of things. And I'll even go further out on a limb here. I don't think DAOs should have one token. I think they should have a whole bunch of tokens. So a good example of this is HATS protocol. Okay, you can have these NFTs that represent roles within your community, and those can be used to represent this tree of responsibilities and access within your community that are in a way a form of governance that is not just a binary proposal token voting system.
Zooming out a little bit, I think one sort of theme that's arising here, right, is the role of tokens and governance in a DAO. And maybe also part of the question here is what's missing from that right now. I've spent a lot of time researching and thinking about governance in DAOs specifically, also in Web 2 decentralized organizations. And I think we're really at a very critical point in sort of DAO history, where token and coin-based voting governance mechanisms have become the norm and have become the default mental model for basically everyone in crypto outside of the DAO people. And I think there's an imminent danger here. I think there's a clear danger, right, of governance and ownership and decision making being restrained to the hands of a few with more financial privilege. I also think there's a huge missed opportunity if we are to just continue defaulting to token-based governance in the design space that is not captured. So I think, Austin, you brought up a great point, one that I've been thinking about a lot, which is how can we create governance systems that dynamically reflect the needs and wants and desires of an organization?
I'm going to take the other side of that. Not to say that innovation and governance isn't important, but I think, like democracy, token-weighted voting is the best of a bunch of really not quite great options. And that really the core issue embedded in here is that most DAOs don't have a business model. And so there isn't this sort of clear focus that we're trying to incentivize, to optimize for, and that as soon as all of a sudden there's meaningful revenue being generated on chain, then all of a sudden governance becomes maybe not easier, but more effective, I think. And so, yeah, is there innovation in governance? 100%. I think we had somebody from Optimism on before with their bicameral house. Fascinating stuff, but right now, I think token weighting governance works when you're thoughtful about distribution, when there's something worth governing, and I think that's going to be good enough for the next little while. At least it doesn't keep me up at night.
Nathan Schneider wrote that essay of the limits of token governance and advocates for human-centered politics. I totally agree that we actually need more politics in these spaces, that using just the token, which abstracts all of the messy emotional parts of governing something that people care about, and just treating it with this one specific like hard-coded tool has limits, and I think like an extra layer of people is like pretty necessary.
Completely agree with that. And like you just got into one of like just like my favorite topics to nerd out on, which is I think I strongly believe in the importance of a hybrid on and off chain governance model. And what I mean by that is first to take a step back. There's a lot of soft power that happens in the governance process. Group chats, clicks, popularity. We've seen this, I think, a lot happen in DAOs. Like MakerDAO will one influential person in the DAO will make a decision, and then other people feel almost obliged to follow. And so I think it's really important to recognize that and acknowledge that, and from there, recognize the importance of embedding off-chain governance processes. In Boys Club, one thing that we realized right after we started doing our DAO and launching our governance process was that we needed to have more conversations before voting, right? So rather than going from proposal to vote directly, we needed to have a Zoom call, a phone call. There needed to be in-person synchronous follow-up and discussion. And I think that's really important. There have been some great studies about this. There's one really great peer-reviewed research paper that drew parallels between Web 2 decentralized organizations like Occupy Wall Street and Black Lives Matter and studied why did they disseminate. And one thing that it found was that often when contributors would make a proposal and that proposal was rejected and there was no follow-up, the contributor would ultimately leave. They didn't feel heard, they didn't feel seen, they didn't receive feedback. And I think it's really important that we think about every step, every human step in the design process of governance and proposals.
Totally. I mean, there's stuff we can borrow from traditional governance, right? If you open a voter's guide for any local election, federal election, you name it, there's pros and cons for anything that goes up. And I feel that is so important. We've kind of started experimenting with that in FWB, saying, this is the proposal that's going up. Here's the counter as you hit the snapshot page or the Discord soft vote, whatever it might be. Because without that level of counterpointing, you won't have a durable proposal that will stand the test of however long it takes to take effect, especially if there are funds at play or if there's, people's time and energy at play.
But
FWB seems...
aren't we supposed to be trying to push more towards smart contracts and autonomous here? And what I'm hearing here is the idea of like reinventing local governments, cities, where I don't know about how it is here in Denver, but politics in Vancouver is like a mess right now. And that doesn't seem like the most optimistic, exciting thing for us to be building towards.
Yeah, I think we're like stuck in this sort of political dichotomy between like right and left in a lot of our traditional systems. And one of the things that's really exciting about DAOs and why we've spent 2/3 of this panel talking about governance is because it's just, we get the first time in hundreds of years where we can just like try to take lots of shots on goal on new governance systems and run a lot of experiments. And you're hearing totally different governance takes from all of us. We're all governance nerds. That's probably why we're here and why we care about DAOs. I do want to acknowledge, though, that we're like, at this point, 3/4 of the way through the panel, and all we've talked about is governance, which is like the most DAO shit ever. We're like sitting in this big conference space that is just entirely floating on VC money, and there's like 6 DAOs out there that sort of kind of work, and like 2 that have actual revenue models. So we kind of ignored Jess's prompt a minute ago about like business models and just kept talking about governance, and I'd love to keep doing that all day, but maybe we could spend a couple minutes on how we actually make money.
Yeah. So I feel like I've thought about this a lot. I am a VC. That's what I do outside of Boys Club. Early stage in crypto, liquid and equity. FinTech Collective's DeFi fund. So I talk to a lot of startups, and at an early stage, I was actually just talking to Austin about this, we're not so much looking at financials, right? A lot of the companies we're looking at are pre-revenue, pre-product market fit. And I've been drawing a lot of parallels between really thinking about the roadmap for Boys Club, right? Like, what is Boys Club when it grows up? How do we make this system work? And the sort of analysis that I do when I'm looking at startups, right? So I think, there's a lot of similarities. I think just like a startup, a DAO needs a common unifying goal and mission. Just like a startup, a DAO needs a North Star, it needs a vision, it needs a roadmap, it needs different teams working on different things, and it needs an intrinsically motivated team, right, with skin in the game.
Like we just talked about, like maybe parts of the pure token approach to governance, which may have drawbacks, and then now also seeing the pure vibes approach to like what the purpose is, and then seeing, well, that's not sufficient. Like, I wonder what the like Google tracker for the word vibes would say, like how it corresponds with ETH prices, but.
I tweet vibes on a daily basis. I'm trying to keep that high. I think we had this era where we could turn vibes into money, and that was phenomenal. It's not where we're at right now. I think North Star, et cetera, yeah, really great business model. You said there's two DAOs you think have business models right now. I want to put you on the spot. What are those?
Well, the problem is the only DAOs that actually make money are the DeFi ones. And like the social ones, which is largely, I think, what we represent, haven't figured that out at all. I think the most compelling, option out there is probably subscriptions and like membership, and this is how like most social organizations, have always worked. Is like you're a member of a thing and you pay dues, or you get together IRL and like pay for getting together at events, and you actually like generate revenue that pays for the organization, and it doesn't take a ton of revenue to support a small team to like keep a community operating.
I'm actually really against that.
Cool. Tell me about it.
Yeah, like I don't think that membership should be like constituted of financial means. I think membership for a sustainable DAO should be constituted of members who are value aligned, intrinsically motivated, and have an idea of what they might want to build or create, or what they might want to change within the DAO that they're joining. And I think ultimately, for a DAO that is going to generate revenue in the future, that set of members is going to be like the core nucleus and mitochondria powering that, right? And we talked about earlier different levels of ownership. I completely agree with that. I think there should be varying levels of commitment and ownership across the DAO. And I totally agree with your point that you don't want every single member of a DAO like being a complete owner or having complete ownership. But I think if your means of access into an organization is financial privilege, you're going to end up with a situation where your members are not unified by the values and motivations and desires and excitement, right? That is going to ultimately sustain the DAO in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, by the way. I think like membership should not be something anyone can buy, and it should also be something that like is not easily, liquid or tradable on exchanges.
I think there's a caveat there. Not anyone can buy, but something that not everyone can buy, I think is the thing. Austin and I always talk about the fact that like if you go to a punk rock co-op venue, you can sweep the floors and get into a show, right? Like you can show up and do the work, just as like, a lot of Web3 folks like, hey, I'm good at Dune Analytics. I made a dashboard for you guys. Will you get me in? Absolutely, right? And we're giving people these kind of effort-based, non-financialized entry points into a DAO, and oftentimes those folks who are the most excited to do the work off the bat are the ones who get in. I'm not saying I'm fully in favor of like apprenticeships in DAOs, but that is always kind of a possibility, and you're always surprised at who is maybe too meek to speak in a Discord or a public forum, but not so meek to be like sliding in your DMs with like, hey, I did this for you. And I think that's so important, and those folks are the people that are kind of your lifeblood as well.
I mean, something you'd see in like on a flyer for a show is not fluff. No one turned away for lack of funds. Like these are like existing vibrant communities, and that is like an existing value that reinforces a positive community that like can still generate funds for artists, creators. Maybe there's like a a further distinction between like which models lend themselves to cultural applications more than social, like other kinds of DAO applications. But yeah, I think like ways to become a member, owner, any kind of distinction beyond buying in is important. If buying in is the only thing, then I think there's a feedback loop of like you bring in people with a specific kind of people it's filtered for. That creates a culture that invites more of those people, and then people look around and then wonder why anyone's here.
Yeah, to that, you have a good example with the nouns, right? Where it's just like they are basically accumulating funds without kind of an exit path or a way for people to actively contribute before the proposal process. And I think we see very actively that there's kind of a calcification of thought or a calcification of ability, which most DAOs, I think, all of us on stage agree, like we want to avoid kind of stagnation. And so how do you keep a token-based, whether financialized or not, as like a social lubricant, if you will, for people to keep moving forward towards a shared goal?
Give you the last word.
Right, because I think ultimately with a DAO, right, you're building a team. And you don't want to build a team just because the team has enough money to be in the team, right? You want to build a team with experience and different experiences and different opinions and diversity of thought. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
I love that this is a panel where we talked about nouns and I didn't say anything about nouns, so Steph, I'd like you to recognize that. Appreciate it. We're coming up on our time here, folks. Really appreciate you hanging out with us today. I know the panelists here would be happy to chat with you afterwards if you have questions or you want to jump in. Oh, I'm supposed to say that I'm from C Club because I didn't say that before. Steph's in charge of our brand, so she would kill me otherwise. So cclub.xyz, come hang out. These are some wonderful members of our community, and
Shout out to Club.
thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.